Welcome to Something To Wrestle with Bruce Prichard. Bruce Prichard. Well, you know, that's not a rib.
She pooted.
Is that a rib?
No,
There's no box of gimmicks.
Rumor and innuendo.
I don't deal in rumor and innuendo. Was he there? I was there. I don't give a shit. I ain't scared of shit.
I ain't scared of shit.
Fuck him.
Thank you, Bruce.
I love you.
Give me double cheeseburger, double cheese, double mayo, double onion, motherfucker.
Bruce Prichard to 1995 when WCW announces they're going to be live and head-to-head with Monday Night Raw with their new program, WCW Monday Nitro. Bruce, when the announcement was made here, was anyone in Titan nervous? Because it feels like this would have been something Vince would have kind of laughed off.
No, we did not. We did not like them moving to Monday nights to go head up with us. It was a major network in TNT, and TBS was basic cable. The other thing that TNT and Turner had was nationally, they were a part of every single basic cable package with every major cable carrier in the country. USA, a NBC Universal property, was not. So while USA, for most people across the country, was a part of basic cable, there were a lot of places that USA was on that next tier, and they weren't always a part of basic cable, and they weren't always included in the majority of cable carriers around. And especially this used to go up Vince's ass sideways, which was kind of funny. Sidebar here. When you would go and travel on the road, there were a lot of hotels, for the most part, back in the day, that they all carried CNN, and they all carried TBS and TNT, because Vince was convinced that Turner had this deal with him. Okay, if you want CNN, you got to take my other properties too. And so that kept us out. So Ted Turner had deviously done this deal to get in the hotels and keep us out. It's like, really? It just was funny, but it's you go through the airports, and for the most part, it was all CNN, and Turner had a monopoly on that news channel format for a long time, and for people to take, if they want a CNN, they had to take his other properties, which was genius as well.
If you're into that kind of thing, we cover the details, all of it, and the history behind the very first Monday Nitro on our spinoff podcast, What Happened When, with Tony Schiavone over at MLWradio.com. Just look for the first Monday Nitro episode in the archives. Of course, Eric made a splash on that very first Nitro when Lex Luger jumped ship from the WWF to WCW. We've already talked about that here on our Lex Express episode. But much like Vince on Raw at the time, Eric was the lead announcer for Monday Nitro. And one of the things I want to ask you about here, Bruce, is one of his more controversial decisions at the time. He started to give away the results for the taped Raw show, Nitro being live, of course, and he thought this allowed the viewer to go ahead and have an opportunity to not feel like they were missing anything. I've always wanted to ask you about this because so many WWF guys at the time would say this was playing dirty or underhanded or unfair. What say you, Bruce?
Well, in that imaginary rule book that we had, it specifically says in there on Chapter 14, Article 13B, that thou shalt not give away the competitors' finishes of their show on your live television show. And they clearly violated that rule. No, it was considered underhanded and dirty, but I think that if the roles were reversed and we had the opportunity to do the same thing, we would have done it. Well, it was good business. Hated it at the time, wanted to kill him and skin the little motherfucker. But, it was competitive business shit.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I was ready to just crucify you about the way Vince would buy people's TV time out from under him, but you probably knew that was coming. Somewhere around this time, Vince starts to position himself as being in a war with Ted Turner himself. I've always found this interesting because Turner was somewhat hands-off when it came to WCW. So isn't Vince smart to position himself in a war against Ted Turner rather than Eric Bischoff? I say that because with Ted, Vince could kind of present himself as the underdog that someone could sympathize with and get behind. Whereas Eric Bischoff, you know, clearly Vince was the guy.
Nobody knew who the hell Eric Bischoff was.
Well, there you go.
If you're going to be in a war with somebody and you're getting beat up and somebody's punching you in the face, don't you want to get punched in the face by the big guy? You don't want some unknown coming in there and be getting shots in on you. So the positioning was that this was Ted Turner, this was TBS, and this was a giant empire and a billionaire coming after this poor mom and pop company that, by God, we're a family company and we're just trying to survive here. We don't have the billions of dollars. We don't have multiple networks to just place whatever we want to put on at any time. So if you're going to get publicity and you want people to hear your story, are they going to listen to a story about, hey, here's this unknown guy coming in and he's making some noise, or are they going to listen to the story about the big bad billionaire that everybody knows and not the most popular guy in the world? Here was also a position where Vince could be
the babyface.
Almost a babyface against Ted Turner, because Ted wasn't the most beloved guy in the world amongst the media types.
The media types. Listen to
you know those people, that fake news, that Dave Silva fake news shit.
When did the hate inside of Titan start for Bischoff?
Probably
reading the results, signing Lex Luger.
I would say probably initially on the announcement of Nitro Live, going head to head with Raw, but it escalated definitely when he started with the giving away the results and that kind of just vehement outward aggression.
Why was the decision made to include Eric Bischoff in the lawsuit? Specifically, we're referencing the Diesel Razor lawsuit that Vince brought against Turner, WCW, and then he named specifically Eric Bischoff.
Because Bischoff was the one who negotiated those contracts, and he's the one that they dealt with. So they felt that he personally would be involved in that. They named everybody.
Bischoff is president of WCW by 1997, and WCW is thumping the World Wrestling Federation in the ratings and every other metric. Around this time, Bischoff is regularly giving speeches to the locker room and to the office that his goal is to put Vince McMahon out of business. Do you remember hearing about these meetings, and how did Vince feel about those?
Sure, we all heard about it, and the feeling was that, we've got to overcome, and that these guys, the feeling on our side, it was a war, and it was personal. So the feeling on our side was that these guys are trying to put us out of business. Eric wasn't the only one saying, I want to put them out of business. Vince on the other side was telling us they want to put us out of business.
Right.
Ted Turner wants to put us out of business. Ted Turner had made comments to Vince before about squishing you like a bug, and I'm in the wrestling business now, Vince, and bought me a wrestling company. So it was personal. It's all business, but yet it's still personal too. So both sides stirred that pot heavily there.
We should mention that the reason for this monumental overtaking of the World Wrestling Federation should probably be credited to the NWO. And the NWO is going to be one of those things that people talk about for a long, long time. And there's actually something kind of cool going on right now on eBay that involves the NWO. Tell everybody about it, Bruce.
Well, that famous NWO chopper, the black and white chopper that Bischoff rode, he rode it at Road Wild in Sturgis, and there were two choppers made for the NWO. And they were made by the late Vinnie Bergman, I hope I'm saying that right, in Southern California. And there's one that Hulk has in his Hogan's Beach Club in Orlando, And the other one, Eric has. And Eric is putting it up on eBay. It's the best offer over $10,000. Part of the proceeds go to Secondhand Hounds Animal Rescue in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, which is a big charity for Eric. Dude, I've seen this bike, been on the bike, never ridden it because I don't do that. But it is showroom condition. It's got like 5,000 miles on the damn thing. So it is essentially brand spanking new. He's ridden it a few times. He's kept it as a memento. And now he's selling it on eBay. And you can go over there and check it out on eBay. The NWO bike that was owned by Eric Bischoff. And we'll put a link to it on Twitter. I'll put it up on Twitter tomorrow so everybody can go there and check it out. But it's a neat little thing that Eric's doing right now.
It's the one they lowered down from the ceiling on Monday Nitro when he's on top of the bike wearing a crown saying it's so good to be king. He had it at the Road Wild pay-per-views, and a portion of the proceeds here go to Secondhand Hounds Animal Rescue. So go check it out. Put it in your Google machine in eBay. It's the 1997 NWO Chopper, personal property of Eric Bischoff that he's letting go for charity. So way to be a good guy there. Russo did not have a contract with the company, so he was free to go. When this happens, does Vince go into panic mode and start double checking contracts for everybody of any sort of significance in the company?
Well, there were not any contracts. An employee doesn't have a contract. They're not a contracted person. So there had never been any reason to have a contract with anyone. You know, you're an employee. There wasn't anything done. So what Vince did was he went back in and did what a lot of big companies do with intellectual properties is they go in and they create non-compete clauses. Mm-hmm. So if someone leaves of their own volition that they can't go work for a direct competitor for X amount of days.
Let me ask you this. When did the non-compete first become introduced into the company? Because it existed for performers prior to this. Who smartened Vince up to that, and when did he start to really make that kind of the new standard for the company? Do you remember?
Well, as far as employees, it started right here. As far as talent, I think he always had some kind of non-compete in the contracts. But for employees, he asked everyone to sign a non-compete clause, something that says, again, if they leave the company on their own volition, that they can't leave and go directly work for a competitor.
For X amount of months or days or whatever.
Correct. 90 days, 60 days, and I forget what it was. I think it was 90 days.
So chat me up. Do you remember there being a wrestler in particular where the non-compete thing would have been a real catalyst for a conversation? Obviously, we've covered Rick Rude and him not being on paper while he was appearing on TV. We did that in our Rick Rude episode. Was there anybody else, though, that you could think?
Not as Luger, far as maybe? A wrestler that I remember off the top of my head, because for the most part, Rude was a special deal. Rude was somebody they wanted, and we were doing daily deals with Rick Rude every day that he appeared. He signed a contract. As for on the wrestling side at this time, obviously Jeff Jarrett's contract was coming up, and he had not been re-signed, but the non-compete on that side was fairly well covered, and it was now an issue of you don't think about your CFO or your head of marketing leaving you and going to work for the competitor, going to work for Ted Turner at the time. That wasn't something we were really thinking about. And Vince got caught with his pants down with Russo and Ed Ferrara just getting up in the middle of the night and leaving. So he wanted to protect that and came in, and especially those of us that were on the wrestling side of things, he had a non-compete drawn up and asked us to sign them.
Do you remember anybody having any hesitation or pushback about doing such?
Yeah, Terry Taylor. Terry Taylor didn't want to sign it. Terry Taylor refused to sign it, and it was interesting because to the man, everyone else in the company were eager to sign it when they were put in front of them. I know we had lawyers look at them, but for the most part, signed it when it was put in front. I signed it when it was put in front of me. I believe Jim Ross signed it when it was put in front of him. Howard Finkel signed it when it was put in front of him. Terry didn't. Terry didn't want to sign it and argued that, well, if something happens to me here, I want to be able to go back to Atlanta and go back to work for WCW. And Vince felt, well, why are you even thinking about that right now? If you're here and you're with us, then why would you even thinking about going back to work for Atlanta? Terry wanted to be the man. He wanted to be the head writer. He wanted to be the head booker. He wanted to be the second in command of Vince McMahon. And he said that if Vince made him the second in command, then he would sign the non-compete. And Vince wasn't willing to do that.
Are you in the room when he asked for that?
No.
And Vince just tells you after the fact he wanted to be second command?
Terry told me that.
So we've talked a lot about Terry.
And Vince, well, to answer your question, yes, Vince did tell me that, and Terry told me that.
Who, in your opinion, or I guess, who did Vince believe to be in second command at that point?
At that point, it was Jim Ross.
So Terry Taylor wanted the JR spot.
Terry Taylor wanted the JR. Terry Taylor, in his mind, he wanted what he considered the Vince Russo spot. He wanted to be the head TV writer and book the towns as well. JR was booking the towns. Russo was writing the television with Vince, and JR was in charge of talent relations. Terry wanted all of that. That's my recollection.
Does he ask for a raise, or does he just want the title?
You know, I'm sure Terry asked for a raise. I don't know specifically, but I would also believe that Terry probably would have been happy with just the title.
Yeah. So chat me up. How does this conversation go down? You know, you said that Terry told you this, and we haven't talked about Terry much here on the show, but what we have talked about was that you guys didn't always have the best relationship. What was your relationship like at this point with Terry Taylor?
It was a business relationship. Terry was there helping out with creative, and I was there on the talent relations side doing the developmental talent, and again, also trying to help out in creative where I could. Terry, you know, we had a relationship. It just was what it was. It was all business. And Terry felt that he was the only one that could step into that position, and that's what he wanted. And for him to stay, he wanted to be the man. He wanted to be the person in charge. So Vince McMahon at the time was in no hurry to bring anyone in and put anyone in charge. He felt that he had given an awful lot of leeway to Vince Russo, and he felt that he had relied an awful lot on Vince Russo at the time. And for Russo to leave the way that he did, it hurt him. And he wanted to build, you know, maybe build a wall and build a protection so that couldn't happen again. Brian Gewirtz tells the story of, you know, when Vince Russo left, that was the turning point in Vince McMahon's head, that he would never let that happen again, that he would create a team, and he would never have just one or two key people in that role, that he always wanted to have a team. So if one person left,
no big deal.
The rest of the team just carries on.
You know, that makes a lot of sense. And I know a lot of times people want to debate and argue that a team isn't necessary and it was better way back when, blah, blah, blah. But the logic you just laid out makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about something you said a minute ago that I want to circle back to. You said, talking about Vince McMahon and not really wanting to bring anybody in because of the whole Russo thing. You talked about Russo's departure and you said it hurt him. I can't help but feel like you mean personally, like emotionally. It just hurt his feelings.
It did. That is what I meant.
That's not something we talk about a lot here on the show, because this is a guy we always position as being mad at his own sneezes. So when we're talking about someone having their feelings hurt, that's not normally the way we characterize a conversation with Vince McMahon. Did you have a specific conversation about this Russo jump hurting Vince's feelings?
I did, and Vince is a proud guy. But at the same time, he will admit when his feelings were hurt or something kind of got to him, and this did. He felt that he had given Russo an awful lot and entrusted Vince Russo, and for Russo to leave the way that he did, it did hurt Vince's feelings. Vince, regardless of how he really is, he sees himself as a very understanding, open, and approachable and caring guy. And I used to say to Vince, you're intimidating. People are intimidated to come talk. God damn it, I'm not intimidating. See what I mean? So I can see Russo's side on not wanting to go and have that discussion with Vince once he made the decision. But I also can see Vince McMahon's side, and I have gone to Vince with some of those topics from time to time, and he's bitten my head off. He's apologized after the fact, but at least I went and talked to him. I know people do, and that is what Vince McMahon was hurt about, that Russo didn't come and speak to him face to face. Just hurt his feelings that he left. It was like a breakup.
Let's talk about the transition, because when Vince kind of has this moment of clarity and he says, this will never happen again, and he strengthens his resolve to make sure that he's never totally dependent on one person ever again. Do you remember there being a conversation where we're going to start looking outside for writers, because the person who steps into the Vince Russo spot is Tommy Blancha, and he was not from wrestling, correct?
Correct. And that process had already started, because Vince McMahon had told Russo, I want more help. I want you to have more help. I want some different writers in. I want people from outside of the wrestling business that have a working knowledge of the wrestling business, but I want somebody from the entertainment industry. Tommy Blancha, I believe, was hired by Vince Russo. So he was going to be brought on and be made a part of the writing team. And then when Blancha started, that was Russo and Ferrara's last week.
One of Eric's first big moves is to start taping at Disney, and he's doing this to cut costs and to give the show a big look with the Disney flyover to start the show. He's trying to position the brand to not look like it's second best, quote unquote, to the WWF. And he felt that a Disney partnership would lend some of their credibility to WCW. Bruce, partnering with Disney, as silly as it may sound to some wrestling fans, is kind of a stroke of genius, was it not?
In hindsight, yeah, it was. But from the WWF point of view, we were never ones to subscribe to the theory of studio wrestling. Didn't like studio wrestling. Didn't like the feel. Didn't like the TBS show. It was considered too small and almost sanitary in a lot of way. And Vince liked the arena look. He liked the big arena look. So he just felt that it was going backwards and was...
Well, I'm not arguing that, but he didn't have... You're saying that I'm asking you to answer the WCW side, and you're giving me a WWF version. What I mean is WCW's not drawing house shows. They're actually losing money on their house shows. Their television tapings are not selling out. Tickets are not moving. So they're running these shows at a loss. So if that is the case, because you're packing it up and moving them everywhere and doing different dates, why don't you just load a whole day up full of back-to-back tapings? Don't worry about charging for tickets. Just run it at a loss, but minimize your production costs and your travel costs and your number of dates that you're paying your guys. And in the process, by doing that Disney flyover, and you see those Mickey Mouse ears on top of the water tower, it feels like it pulls WCW Southern Wrestling out of the South and makes it more of a recognizable brand, at least by association. Because no matter who you were, at that time, the WWF was almost like the Kleenex or the Coca-Cola or the Band-Aid as far as a brand of wrestling. Any sort of mainstream media always referred to professional wrestling as a WWF wrestling situation. This, to me, feels smart because it reduces your overhead, but it also, to use a wrestling term, you kind of get the rub from Disney.
It was smart. Definitely. It was smart, and it was different. I think that but again, the traditionalists, everybody pokes holes in it with guys getting hurt and switching titles in advance. Oh my God, everybody's going to know so-and-so's not the champion right now. But to that point, they weren't running house shows. They weren't making money running house shows, and they weren't going to run them. So it was smart. I thought it was a stroke of genius in how they did it. Hindsight.
Well, I was going to say, if you were going to shit on it much longer, I was going to ask how your most recent Impact tapings went, but we'll move on. While he's down in Orlando taping at Disney, Flair helps Bischoff set up a meeting with Hulk Hogan. And Bruce, this is less than a year away from Hogan's last shot with the WWF and right smack dab in the middle of McMahon's steroid trial. What was the reaction to hearing the news that Hogan was meeting with WCW?
We kind of felt it was inevitable, and we thought that Hulk was trying to do that as a power play.
Right.
That I'm going to go down and meet with them to solidify my position up in the WWF. And by God, they're going to come crawling. Vince felt that at the time, you know what? If he wants to go, let him go. It hurt. It was kind of a kick in the teeth, but it hurt. But at the same time, he wasn't that upset about it. I think inside more personally, he was more upset than he was business-wise because the WWF at that time kind of needed a rest from Hulk Hogan.
Something everyone was talking about when Hogan signed this deal was the language creative control that was included in the contract. Is this the first time you remember hearing of a talent getting this? And what did you think of Hogan negotiating this in black and white?
Genius on his part. Again, if you're going to take care of that character, then have control over it and be able to have some say in what they're going to do with it. So I thought it was extremely smart on Bischoff's part. On Hogan's part. And for Eric, what'd they have to lose?
Right.
So they got Hulk Hogan. In order to do that, they had to make some concessions. And everybody likes to poke holes in Hogan's contract and some of the things that they did. But they weren't they weren't running house shows and drawing money there. They weren't selling merchandise. So to give up these things, you weren't giving anything up. So anything that you brought in that you were able to realize by the acquisition of Hulk Hogan is all positive, and you're getting something you weren't getting anyway.
Once they do this Hogan ticker tape parade after he signs, they go straight to pay-per-view. And it's the pay-per-view most fans think that WWF should have done 2 years prior at WrestleMania 8. It's Ric Flair versus Hulk Hogan at Bash at the Beach 94. Was there any feeling of, man, we shouldn't have let him do this?
No, not really. It was inevitable. We knew once Hogan was there, they had to go there.
Yeah.
Where the hell else are you going to go? You want to get your match with Hogan versus Flair. So why not? They had already done it in the WWE prior to that, and they didn't have a lot of success with it, so they weren't that worried about it. And then if they didn't do that, we probably would have wondered what the hell were they thinking.
How come when they don't do it, you wonder what the hell they're thinking, but you don't do it?
Because they had nothing else.
It was their biggest pay-per-view they'd ever done at that point.
Okay.
I was just throwing it out there.
It's not saying a lot.
Are you really doing this right now? The WWF ran King of the Ring in 94 and got 185,000 buys. This Bash at the Beach does 225,000.
Well, it should have. They had Hulk Hogan on it.
Oh, gosh. We'll move on. Randy Savage and a lot of other former WWF talent signed with WCW by the end of 94. And a lot of this is happening because WCW is offering guaranteed contracts with fewer dates. The first guaranteed contracts in the business started at the end of the Crockett era with guys like the Road Warriors and Lex Luger, but these continue even when Turner buys the company. Of course, the various leaders there, like Bill Watts, were trying to cut costs. But when Bischoff comes in, he's able to get Turner to buy into investing in the company in order to compete. And with some right hires and creating some efficiencies, like no longer running house shows and taping at Disney, they can afford to do this. But this is not the way the industry has done things historically with guaranteed money. So the lure for the guys jumping ship here is the guaranteed money at a time when the business was down and with fewer dates, right, Bruce?
Oh, very attractive, man. For guys to be able to know in black and white, I'm going to make this amount of money in a year and have it guaranteed. It was unheard of in the business, and it hit, few guys had it, but now Eric was making it a standard deal for everybody. You come in, you have X amount of dates, and you're going to get your money. It was attractive as hell.
Compare that to the WWF standard deal at the time.
We guarantee you opportunity.
It was 10 dates for like $1,500 or something like that, right?
Yeah, it was some. I don't remember if we even had dates, specific dates in there that we guaranteed people. It was just like if you worked TV, you were guaranteed, I think, $50 was the only monetary guarantee that was in the contracts. We guaranteed you opportunity. That was it.
So it's no wonder, that some of these guys make a business decision. We're skipping a lot here, but this show is about Bischoff and the WWE. So we'll go forward to 1995 when WCW announces they're going to be live and head-to-head with Monday Night Raw with their new program, WCW Monday Nitro. Bruce, when the announcement was made here, was anyone in Titan nervous? Because it feels like this would have been something Vince would have kind of laughed off.
No, we did not. We did not like them moving to Monday nights to go head up with us. It was a major network in TNT, and TBS was basic cable. The other thing that TNT and Turner had was nationally, they were a part of every single basic cable package with every major cable carrier in the country. USA, a NBC Universal property, was not. So while USA, for most people across the country, was a part of basic cable, there were a lot of places that USA was on that next tier, and they weren't always a part of basic cable, and they weren't always included in the majority of cable carriers around. And especially this used to go up Vince's ass sideways, which was kind of funny. Sidebar here. When you would go and travel on the road, there were a lot of hotels, for the most part, back in the day, that they all carried CNN, and they all carried TBS and TNT, because Vince was convinced that Turner had this deal with him. Okay, if you want CNN, you got to take my other properties too. And so that kept us out. So Ted Turner had deviously done this deal to get in the hotels and keep us out. It's like, really? It just was funny, but it's you go through the airports, and for the most part, it was all CNN, and Turner had a monopoly on that news channel format for a long time, and for people to take, if they wanted CNN, they had to take his other properties, which was genius as well.
All right, let's keep rolling. They're working with LOD 2000 through all the house show loops, and on Raw, they're teaming with Triple H against LOD 2000 and Owen Hart. As we cruise in to, here we go, are you ready? April 27th, 1998. This is where we see Raw invade Nitro. DX, of course, goes over to the Norfolk Scope, and they're dressed in camo. They're driving a tank. I'm sure we're going to do more about this at some point in the future, but we've got to talk about it a little bit now because we've put this on the poll several times, and it never wins. Catch us up, man. What do you remember about the time DX invaded Nitro?
Well, first of all, it was something that we had talked about in a production meeting, and the question was posed: what would, back in the old days, if you had an outlaw promotion that was coming into your town, what did you do? If you were the underdog, and what did you do? I said, well, hell, man, they used to send the toughest guys in the territory, go sit in the front row and say hello, go knock on their door. And it just so happened we were going to be close to where Nitro was, and the opportunity arose, and Vince decided this was it. We're going to go down and say hello. I produced all of those invasion spots with those guys. And on this particular day, we went down, and it was, and Russo had worked a lot with these guys up until this point, and I had been given a directive from Vince McMahon exactly what I could do and what I couldn't do. But he also made it very clear to all those guys, it's like Bruce has final say, and listen to what he says, and if he, pulls you back, you gotta listen to him. So we had, you just don't know when you go out and do this shit. You don't know what you're going to run into. There's so many variables, from somebody on the other side going too far, maybe one of your guys going too far. Legally, we were told that we couldn't go on the grounds. We definitely could not go inside the building. That was one thing our lawyers told us, do not do. Don't go inside the building under any circumstances. But a lot of different shit happened. The biggest thing to me that came out of this from a talent perspective was Triple H, Billy, Brian, X-Pac, and even Joni. Every one of those guys and girl were ready to fight. And when I say they were ready to fight, they were willing to do whatever it took to get over and to make noise and to make this thing work big time. Nobody was afraid of what would happen. I remember it was actually Brian James who saw that the downstairs, when we drove the tank down the ramp and they'd closed the door on us, it was Brian James that saw that door was open and said, "Hey, let's go down the ramp. Let's see if we can get in the building." I said, "We can't get in the building, but we can go down the ramp because it's still technically a street, actually." But every one of those guys impressed me so much with how far they took everything without stepping over the line, and just the balls that they had. Because a lot of guys wouldn't, believe it or not, there's a lot of talent that wouldn't have done what they did. Oh, I got buddies here. I got this, that, and the other thing. Brian, this is great. We were talking about what do we do if the WCW guys come out to confront us? What do we do? And it's like, what happens if Ming is leading that charge? And I remember saying, if Ming is there, feed me to Ming, because I felt that Ming wouldn't eat me. Thought that, we had a friendship that went way back, that I didn't think that he would kill me. And Brian was like, "I hope my brother's there. I'll kick his ass." We fought forever. I'll kick his ass. I hope he comes out. I just hope he comes out on principle. But it was Billy and Hunter and everybody, man. X-Pac, they were all like, "Come on, let's go." Nobody was afraid. Everybody wanted that confrontation. It was fight at this point, man, they were fighting for their company. They were fighting for their position, and they knew that this was their opportunity to stand out apart from everybody else. And they just impressed me so damn much on everything that we did, because they had the same attitude of, guys, we've got one shot at this. We got to make it great. And they did everything I asked them to do. And they did shit on their own that was tremendous. And I think that's the whole reason, because this was the pivot. This is where we kicked their ass in the ratings, and we never turned back.
No doubt about it. It was certainly one of the more memorable moments here. And you guys weren't done yet. You guys do a series of television tapings that, we can kind of skip over. On May 11th, you would invade the CNN Center and WCW headquarters. Of the three little visits, I guess, CNN Center and WCW headquarters, and then the actual live event in Virginia, which one's most memorable to you, and which one was the least memorable?
God, they were all equally memorable, because every one of them had their own different set of confrontations. And I still say that when we do DX and we do this invasion thing, man, there's so many great stories. But we had the cops called on us, and we got surrounded at the very first one in Norfolk, and we had our own battles there. At the one in Smyrna is where they called 911, and they screamed that we were being attacked with weapons at the front door, and we had the entire Smyrna Police Department show up. At the one in CNN Center was just a great story of how I kept the crew there. And we requested to see Ted Turner and actually got all the Turner employees on camera doing the DX chops and things like that. There's a little sidebar. When we went to the office in Smyrna, Georgia, there's a sign on the grass, and it says no trespassing and no solicitors. Well, Road Dogg jumps off the tank and runs up to the sign and says, "What exactly does this say here? I don't understand. Is this French? No trespassing." And we just kind of goofed on it, but we shot it.
Right.
So when the lawsuit came about, when WCW sued us and we were suing WCW, I was in a deposition and they asked me, they said, "Well, did you guys trespass?" I said, "No, not necessarily. We just went up and knocked on the door and we asked to see if Eric Bischoff or anybody was there." They said, "Well, it was clearly marked no trespassing and no solicitors." I said, "Well, we weren't trespassing and we weren't soliciting anything. We were just asking to see someone." He said, "So you didn't know that there was posted no trespassing?" So how would I know that? And the guy plays the tape for me of me telling Road Dogg, "All right, Jesse, come on, let's go. Enough, let's go." And yeah, videotape. It's a hell of a thing.
Videotape is a hell of a thing. That's awesome. Here's kind of a fun one. On May 19th, the Raw shotgun tapings, we would see the New Age Outlaws beat the New Midnight Express. Kind of a similar deal here where you've got two single stars and you're putting together a tag team. And this is sort of the tale of two ways this thing can go. On the one side, one of the most over acts in the company, the New Age Outlaws. On the other, the Midnight Express, or the New Midnight Express. How would you compare and contrast the two here?
Well, one actually was new and the other was a retread. So regardless of the new members of the New Midnight Express, the idea was old and it had Corny as the manager, and, you know, Corny wasn't invested in it. Corny felt that the New Midnight Express didn't have a chance in hell, but he was willing to go along with it and give it his best shot. But it just wasn't there's only one Midnight Express.
So on June 1st, that issue of The Observer would see the New Age Outlaws named as the Tag Team of the Year. But I think somewhere in there, Meltzer was clear to make sure that everybody understood it was based on their charisma, not their work rate. Your response to that?
Over at BrucePrichard.com, you can get my response to that with a beautiful FDM shirt.
June 8th,
and I'll call you too.
The New Age Outlaws get a win over LOD 2000 and the DOA in a triple threat match. And this happens when Gunn pins Road Dogg. Process what I just said. This is awesome. The New Age Outlaws are working a triple threat tag match against LOD 2000 and DOA. And Gunn wins when he pins Road Dogg. It's a very creative finish. And the finish actually gives birth to what we now call the Outlaw Rule. It's a future, for all future triple threat tag matches, the partners can't pin each other. And this was the loophole. Whose idea is this? Because this is really, really creative. And I guess the first time it had been done.
I think that was Vince Russo's idea.
It's amazing.
What would happen, bro? Because the argument was, well, if they can tag anybody, why can't they tag each other and basically the other one lay down? Well, you know, everybody, of course, all the old timers were all like, that's a stupid idea. Why would they do that? But it makes sense.
It makes total sense. The original plan, according to The Observer, was for Bret to return around SummerSlam and put Shawn over in a series of ladder matches. And the plan was to build the entire company around Shawn, and that Bret was going to be one in a long list of challengers to headline a classic series of main events. And Bret always felt like this ladder match was his gimmick, since he is the person who sort of brought it to the company. And Bret vetoed the idea of putting Michaels over again and then lengthened his time off. So when he returned, it was with the provision that he'd be getting the title from Michaels at WrestleMania, Of course, a lot changed before that, and it never happened. And then on Raw, on May 12th, Brett babbled on and on at the end of the show, which left Michael standing there looking like an idiot, which we just talked about. The week after, this is all breakdown from the Observer, the whole thing in Mobile happens. Now, here's a wrinkle that's not been reported outside of the Observer. When Shawn showed up and made this Sunny Days comment, Meltzer would say he was slurring his words badly and in no condition to perform. I've never heard that before the Observer report here. It wasn't any books or shoot interviews. Set the record straight. Well, Shawn fucked up when he did the Sunny Days comment.
No, not that I know. No, absolutely not. I can tell you one time Shawn was screwed up when we did a remote at Jose Lothario's house one time, and he and Austin were screwed up and been drinking all day and slurring on their promos there, but no.
Meltzer wrote, the enigma of being arguably the most talented performer in American rings and seemingly being ill-equipped emotionally to handle the spot his talent has gotten him came out once again in recent weeks. Would you feel like that's an accurate description of Shawn? I mean, at this time, he's got to be the top guy, but I thought being ill-equipped emotionally to handle the spot that his talent has gotten him. Wow. That's a pretty apropos deal there.
He was. He really was.
Now,
He wasn't ready emotionally. I don't know. He was dependent on drugs and having a real hard time.
Hang on. Just now, you said he's dependent on drugs and you sniffed. And I know that's not what you meant, but our listeners will take that differently.
No. Yeah, I just sniffed. No, I'm just saying that he's
taking prescription pills and
he's
drinking.
taking prescription pills. He's overcompensating. Yes. And he's overcompensating, and that's what everybody's worried about him doing. But yeah, I just don't think that mentally he was ready for it. You're right.
Meltzer would write, Michaels became at odds with Vince McMahon by demanding a new contract, one that would put his pay at the same level as his rival, who fell into a bidding war and came out with it with the most lucrative guaranteed money contract in WWF history. When McMahon turned down his demands, he gave his notice, wanting to join his, quote, real friends in WCW. He had 4 years remaining on his contract, so McMahon refused, and the general attitude during the week was they had no idea where Michaels' head was, and contingency plans were being made both for television and pay-per-views, along with house shows, in case Michaels decided not to show up. And there were reports that Michaels had a contract in his clause that was to guarantee him the status of being the highest paid wrestler in the company. Of course, that rumor's out there because that's what Hall and Nash got. But to the best of my understanding, that was not the case. The feeling during the week seemed to be that if Michaels were to quit the promotion, that they would do everything they could to enforce the contract and make him sit out the next 4 years rather than go to WCW. He had signed a 5-year contract shortly after winning the title at WrestleMania 12 and had a downside guarantee believed to be in the $750,000 range, which guaranteed him the top spot during a period when house shows were doing well and merchandising that goes along with the top spot. He could be figured in to earn significantly more than that. So chat me up here. Do you remember him demanding a new contract? And to the best of your recollection, was he about $750 at the time before he asked for that?
Shawn was doing well, and I'm not going to give you numbers, but I do remember Shawn's whole thing was, I want to leave. I don't want to be here anymore. You've got Brett, go take Brett. And he was kind of like a petulant child. He goes, my friends are down south and I just want to go down. I want to be with my friends. They're willing to pay me what I'm worth. And they're willing to pay me. If they were willing to pay Bret Hart all that money, imagine what they'll pay me. And I do, God, I remember specifically, just let me go be with my friends.
Now, Meltzer would write that when his friends first signed this deal with WCW, he was sort of puffing his chest out because he felt like this made him the long-term king of the promotion. And he's even bragging that the opposition couldn't afford to pay him what he was making. So he felt like he's in the catbird seat, but now just a few months later, or I guess a year later, not so much. So Brett says he had a long talk on June 2nd in Huntington, West Virginia with Vince. And this is when Vince says the company is in financial peril. They're just barely hanging on. and he has no choice but to restructure the contract. He promises to still get Bret all the money that's owed to him, but there's just going to be more at the back end. And Bret winds up calling his lawyer to see what his options were if Vince were to try and do that, but Bret didn't think he really would. I'm curious, because this feels like a big conversation for Vince. Do you and Pat have a heads up on these types of conversations and that they're going to happen? And does Vince sort of talk you through it before he does it? Maybe like getting talking points or practicing his speech or something like that?
Well, at this time, Pat wasn't, a part really of anything. Pat had retired, and Pat was more part-time coming in and out. I did have a heads up on it and knew that he was going to go in, and Vince was the one that made the deal with Bret, and Vince felt that he was the one that needed to go in and talk to Bret as well about what can we do to work this thing out.
This takes us to King of the Ring, June 8th in Providence, and the Hart Foundation here do an in-ring pay-per-view promo talking about the next pay-per-view. So they're on a pay-per-view talking about the next pay-per-view. They're of course promoting Canadian Stampede, and they're saying they'll take on any 5 wrestlers to face them in a 10-man tag. And the next day at Raw, Bret says that earlier in the day, he told Neidhart as soon as he saw Shawn, he was going to straighten him out, but Neidhart begged him not to because he just returned. So Bret decided not to confront him. Instead, Bret's in the bathroom getting ready to do a promo, putting gel in his hair. And while he's in there, he sees Shawn's reflection behind him in the mirror. And Bret said he could tell Shawn was uptight. So he smiled and said, "Hey, Shawn." And Shawn responded, "Fuck you. You haven't talked to me in over a fucking month. What makes you think I want to talk to you now?" And then stomped away. So later, these guys see each other in the dressing room. And at this point, Shawn has been over fixing his boots, and Bret pushes him up to his feet and says, "You got something to say to me?" And that's when Shawn swings at him, but misses. And Bret punched him in the chin. Shawn came at him. Bret grabs him by the hair, and Bret says, "I pretended I was doing a hammer throw in the Olympics. I was dragging him around the room when a hysterical Pat and a frantic Lawler ran in and jumped on top of me. Unable to pry me off, Pat shouted for other wrestlers to help, but Davey and Crush had no intention of helping Shawn." So Bret kind of plays it off like it was really nothing, but he does come away with clumps of Shawn's precious hair in his hands. He says, "I blasted him. Don't fuck with my family, you little fucker." Shawn looked ready to burst into tears as he stomped across the hall to Vince's office, shouting loudly for everyone to hear that "I quit. It's an unsafe working environment." And Cornette has said that he was in the office when Shawn came in, and Shawn had found the clumps of his hair and he slammed it down on the desk and quit. And when he walked out, Vince followed. So Cornette took the hair and put it in a bag and took it home. And now somewhere his ex-wife has a bag of Shawn Michaels' hair.
Motherfucker.
Bret wrote, "Vince looked like a jilted lover whose boy toy had up and left him, but he told Bret that this had been inevitable, but it was long overdue. He told Bret to take the night off, and Bret said before Raw was over, Vince was hyping the fight on the 900 number." So that's what Bret says happened. Meltzer had a slightly different report. He says that most of the eyewitness accounts he heard where the Hart was screaming about how Michaels had affected his real life with some of his comments, and Michaels was a smart ass back. And then they went at it, with everybody saying that Bret Hart started it, but that Shawn was every bit as guilty in, kind of the lead up here. But it was largely a one-sided short tussle with a few punches thrown and a large clump of hair pulled out of Shawn's head, where he had now a major bald spot. His face is all puffy from the punches, and he had a bloody elbow from being drug around on the floor. And Hart had no major injuries besides re-injuring the knee a little bit, but mostly it just gave Jerry Briscoe and Pat Patterson and some other wrestlers an opportunity to separate these guys. Shawn was out of the building by 7:57 before the show ever went on air, and Bret left around 8:30. Had Shawn stuck around, he was supposed to wrestle Brian Pillman in the main event. And Michaels was going crazy after this in the arena, in the parking lot, on the phone, saying he's never coming back. He's never working here. It's an unsafe working environment. So probably the most famous backstage fight in WWF history, certainly up there. I mean, 2 main eventers. What can you tell us about this? You were here.
I was in the office with Cornette and Vince. I was there when Shawn walked in with the clumps of hair in his hand, and slammed his hair down on the desk in there, and Vince's, or on the table in Vince's office. And the only thing that I remember, the key phrase out of the whole thing was unsafe working conditions. And I think everybody's ears kind of perked up with that I'm going, oh boy, here's a lawsuit. But from there, Pat came in and Pat was just so blown up. Oh my God, it was terrible. They locked in, and the Brett had the hair, and he just pulling his hair out, and he reaching down, and the big and the hair's everywhere. And they went through an acoustical wall that had the acoustical foam on it. They went through one of those walls into the shower, into the bathroom, and it was more of a probably a couple punches thrown, and then Brett kind of locked in on the hair. They went down, and then they got pulled apart. But yeah, Shawn was just absolutely going insane. Now, we're in the office, and we have no idea that this is happening. And so when Shawn comes in, it's like, you're looking at him, and his face is a little red and everything. And he's standing there with his hair, and it's all frizzy and all out. And he's just going absolutely batshit. And we're thinking, what the hell happened? And then, he's leaving. He stormed out. And then Vince, we all kind of walked out to go find out what happened. And then Pat came up to us, and he was all out of breath. And we were like hoping Pat wasn't having a heart attack. And then found Brett, and Vince talked, but Brett was more, and I heard more of, that Brett was kind of the instigator, but yet Shawn bowed up and jumped back in his face, and that they both were, in my opinion, from hearing everything, both guys were equally at fault. But Brett was just so, calm isn't the word, but just even keel afterwards.
On June 10th, McMahon sent an internal memo out to WWF executives saying, last night in Hartford, Shawn Michaels breached his contract by refusing to perform. We're hopeful Shawn will reconsider his position and return to work. Shawn has 4 years to go on his 5-year contract. The door is open for Shawn to return under the terms of his contract. Of course, Meltzer published this and says it becomes clear to him that Michaels isn't going to be on any future house shows or TV shows, at least for the foreseeable future. This is kind of funny to me. I don't know why, but he sends a memo out the next day, and it's an internal memo, and he's referring to Shawn Michaels and a real life contract by using his kayfabe name. What an interesting business pro wrestling is. What did an internal memo look like back then? Did Vince just type the letter and have it printed and sign them all, and then his secretary brings them around and slides them under everybody's door? What's that process look like?
I'm trying to think if we were in the computer age at that point. I think we were actually in the computer age at that point.
So he would email it to everybody?
It was probably an email at that point. Yeah. So his assistant probably would have typed up the email and sent it out, or it came from McDivitt or one of the legal folks.
I don't know why.
But we had to do that. It's a CYA, you cover your ass. Again, that key phrase that made everybody perk up: unsafe working conditions.
No, I get it. I get that you have a legal thing you have to respond to, but you're responding to a legal thing with a kayfabe name. It would be like if Netflix, when they fired Kevin Spacey, said Frank Underwood is no longer going to dude, say Kevin Spacey. What are you talking about?
Well, half the people in the office probably wouldn't have known who Michael Hickenbottom was. I go, who's it? Is this a new guy?
It's just hilarious to me to think about, what if Sylvester Stallone walked off a movie? Rocky Balboa has to return to work. Brett said that Shawn came back on July 3rd because Vince had threatened to stop his $15,000 a week checks. Meltzer wrote of it. Michaels' attorney sent the WWF a letter saying that he hadn't breached his contract. He was injured in the fight with Hart, claiming both knee and neck injuries, and he's unable to wrestle for 4 to 6 weeks. He requested a meeting with McMahon in San Antonio on June 19th for both sides to settle their differences, and the WWF was now making plans as if Michaels will return back to work in the latter part of July. It seems like from a storyline standpoint to keep Michaels and Hart apart, so it isn't likely they're going to turn this into an angle for SummerSlam just due to the match and these guys having problems in real life. how did Vince handle getting Shawn to come around when he gets this letter? Does he just take a big sigh of relief and say, okay, let me just go kiss his ass a little and we'll get everybody back together?
Vince was pissed, and it was Vince and Jim Ross that went down and met with Shawn, and it was Shawn and his lawyer and his dad that met. I remember Vince telling me, he goes, I'm going to bring JR. He'll make a better witness than you. I was like, great. I don't have to be involved in it. But they went down, and Vince was at the point where he was getting fed up with Shawn's antics.
First of all, tell us, how did you get hired with TNA? For those of you who are constantly asking, Bruce left the WWE in 2008, did some other stuff, started some businesses, had a run doing some of that stuff. And then when and how did you get hired with TNA when you first went to work with them?
In the fall of 2010, I got a call from Eric Bischoff. And Eric had been at TNA. He and Hulk had gone there. They'd been about a year working with TNA. And Eric called me, asked me what I was doing, and what my relationship was with Vince Russo, and if I had any heat with Russo.
And that stemmed from, believe it or not, once upon a time, you had another podcast.
I did.
And on that podcast, you had been reviewing Raw, and you had been reviewing SmackDown, and you had been reviewing TNA, and maybe you had been a little critical of the TNA product. Is that
I was
fair
very
to say?
critical of the TNA product at the time. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But also I'd been on Steve Austin's podcast, and I simply, when asked about Vince Russo, I commented that the guy that makes the decisions in the WWF, WWE, is the same guy that's made the decisions since the 80s, and the same guy that made them in the 90s, 2000, same guy making them now, same guy that will make them until he takes his last breath, and that's Vince McMahon.
Right.
And while Vince Russo was there, that he came up with some great ideas and had a hell of a run there, but it wasn't as Vince Russo would like you to believe sometimes that he was the end-all, be-all. It was blessed by Vince McMahon, and there was an editor involved and a filter, and that filter being Vince McMahon. And Russo took exception to that. And we talked about it, asked me if I said it. I said, yeah, sure did. Next. And, we got through it. I like Vince Russo. I always thought I got along with Vince Russo. Vince never really had any heat with me. I guess I did with him. But, we talked, asked me to come in and help him out with TV production backstage at their events when they recorded their TVs, and I was happy to do so. I was looking for something to do.
Okay, so two things I want to ask about. One, what was everybody's role? Because you said Hogan, Bischoff, and then Russo, so I want to delve into that. But first, I want you to elaborate on what you just said when you said I did production and backstage and blah, blah, blah. I want you to be very specific. Talk to us like we're third graders for a minute. Break down exactly what your duties would have been when you say production and backstage and whatnot.
I produce the backstage stuff.
Golly, here we go. So when you produced, you're saying you go find the talent, you go find the cameraman.
I had other people go do that.
You go, will you help me? Why are you doing this?
What? Okay. Production, they have a run sheet. It's some people call it a script. Back in my day, if somebody asked you if you had a script, it meant you had a handful of pills. Nowadays, people ask you got your script, it's a sheet of paper, a bunch of words on it, telling you what to do and what to say.
And Vince Russo would have written this run sheet.
The scree is zipped, yeah.
And the scree zipped would be back time to be approximately the length of the show, and it would usually have some dialogue in there and maybe a big spot in the match or roughly the number of minutes in a match, whatever was pertinent to the angle.
Yeah, and the backstage stuff that you see that's shot out of the arena, those are, you get talent earlier in the day, you shoot those, and I would tell them what to do, tell the camera how to shoot it and what to do from.
So you'd pick like a location, shoot it from this angle,
sure.
Move your head that way, move your hand this way, whatever.
Yes.
Okay. So you're only doing per shot deals here. Was that?
I was only coming in, and at that time I was just working the television tapings.
So it was like a per diem. Here's what we.
Well, not a per diem. It was just a per day, like a
contract.
Yeah.
Like one of the boys.
Exactly.
And so they would fly you from Houston to Orlando
or wherever they were doing TV. Yeah.
And most of the time, so are they doing TV on the road at this point?
Well, when I first went in, they did a pay-per-view in Daytona Beach.
Okay.
So, or Tallahassee, Daytona Beach.
Yeah, that was actually, I think, the first one that you were there for.
Right.
So that's 10, 10, 10.
Correct.
That's going to be Bound for Glory 2010. Ironically, the theme song for that show is written and performed by Billy Corgan.
Imagine that.
Small world.
And I told you I'd never heard any of his music before.
Yeah, that shocked me. I didn't realize you were so damn old that you didn't know any of his 1979 or any of that stuff.
I know Merle Haggard's.
Yeah, well, roll tide. So you're doing just kind of like the day deal. And we kind of ran through some names to start here. You said Hogan, Bischoff, and Russo. Hogan and Bischoff are longtime friends of yours. I know you get along okay with Russo, I guess, now too, but let's just address the elephant in the room. I think a lot of both of those guys, but the narrative would certainly be, oh, Hogan and Bischoff came in and ruined the company. They took all the money and made us go live on Mondays and put us on the road and put us in the red, and they were siphoning off all the money. What was your perception at the time?
Well, the reality of the situation was they brought Hogan in, and Eric came along with him, and they brought Hogan in to broaden the name and get more recognition for TNA by
having Hulk Hogan.
And they were looking for him to get them deals and more sponsorships and also international deals.
His name meant something.
His name still means something.
Sure.
And it was Hulk Hogan. And Eric, with his production background, and Eric had connections, and Eric is a great producer and gets a bad rap. But I think Eric's a damn talented son of a bitch. And they were using them. And, you talk about the Monday night thing that they did when they tried to compete with WWE on Monday nights. At least they had the balls to go do it. At least they were trying something different than what they had been doing that wasn't working.
Right.
So they tried something new. It didn't work. They adjusted and moved on. I would have done that differently if I had been there.
But you respect the balls.
I respect the balls. I respect them for doing something different, changing the norm. And a lot of people, change is difficult for people. So they changed the norm, they challenged the status quo, and they went out and did something different.
It's also easy to armchair quarterback decisions like that.
Yeah.
But I guess what I was getting at is, you hear a lot of the younger guys, and this is common. This goes back, decades in wrestling. They always want to talk about who's on top and that they're holding them down and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of the guys, I think, had just read so much of the internet and so much of the books and
rumor and innuendo.
Yeah, and so they were led to believe, if Hogan and Bischoff are coming in, they're going to hold us down. But your perception was totally different from that. Is that fair to say?
It is. No, without a doubt. That's definitely fair to say, because they were trying to build it up.
So what was...
their reputations were on the line just as much as everybody else's, if not more so.
Right.
Who gets the credit for it, not working out? Hogan and Bischoff. Do they get the credit for having the balls to step out and do something different?
Right.
That's the part that gets me. And, everybody can sit back and go, oh, they never should have done that. Because, well, they did.
It's easy to
and
say
they
that
own
now
it. It's very easy to say that now. But they weren't the ones there making that decision and saying, hey, let's go out and try this.
It's like a football game, If the play works, it's a great play.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, it's a terrible play.
If you want to sit behind your computer and second guess everything and send your little newsletter out, then
What is Bischoff's official title when you come in?
Good question. I think Eric was executive producer at that point.
What was Hogan's?
Hulk Hogan.
His title was Hulk Hogan.
Yeah. He didn't have a title. He was Hulk Hogan.
What did he do?
Hulk, advised and would give his input on creative things. And
so he'd sit in on booking meetings and stuff?
No. Eric sat in on the booking meetings for him, kept him apprised of it, but Hulk would have suggestions. Hulk would sit in on production meetings, day of TV, and give his 2 cents. But they used Hulk for his name. They used Hulk to go out and try and get sponsors.
It was really like almost like a licensing deal. Just permission to
pretty
use
much.
it. What was Russo's title?
Writer.
Who was the head writer?
Russo.
Okay. So let's run through some other names here. Terry Taylor. He was at the company when you got there. You really don't like that guy.
I don't not like him.
So, Timmy,
I like everybody. I just like some people more, some people less.
and you can find out who you like more and less at ProWrestlingTees.com/.
Which just because I love you doesn't mean I like you.
That's right, but you're going to love the way you look in that shirt. Check it out, ProWrestlingTees.com/. Bruce Prichard. Terry Taylor was there, and he was in talent relations.
Correct.
When you eventually get the nod to be full-time. So when do you make a transition from going on just a per-shot deal to being full-time?
That would have been April, May of 2011. So I'd come in between October and that time, and
So about 6 months later.
yeah,
So they kind of just use you on TV tapings and pay-per-views and just kind of fill you out. And then once they're comfortable 6 months later, they extend a full-time offer. Who does that come from?
Dixie.
Does she just meet you at a taping? Does she fly you into Nashville?
They started flying me in, I want to say maybe in January 2011, and I would come in for a day or two and meet with the powers that be. I sat with Creative a couple times. And
Just in Nashville?
Just in Nashville, yeah.
Okay, and this is at the Cummins Stations building?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, downtown Nashville.
Can you compare those offices to Titan Towers? I'm not saying as a knock. I'm saying a lot of people listening don't know that there's a difference or have never been to them. Or I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just,
Have you ever been to the Waffle House?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I love the Waffle House.
You do.
Yeah.
And Waffle House is great. You ever been to the Palm?
I have.
Okay. One's a Palm and one's Waffle House.
So you liked them both, but maybe one was
Sure.
a little
different.
fancier than the other.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
They both provide food.
And steak.
They both feed people. They both provide steak.
Yeah.
Different quality.
Everybody wants to know this, whether we want to talk about it or not. We probably ought to. And then we'll run through the rest of this behind-the-scenes names list, and we'll get out of here. Victory Road, 2011, the Jeff Hardy story. Kind of curious through what happens. Did you see Jeff earlier in the day?
I did. I saw Jeff earlier in the day. I saw Jeff about 7 o'clock that night.
So about the time the pay-per-view starting.
Yeah.
So where are you sitting for this pay-per-view?
I was all over. I mean, I wasn't sitting anywhere. I kind of was all over.
So you're not just
backstage
working
stuff.
the gorilla position?
No. For that one, I was producing backstage stuff and interviews and kind of all over.
Does everybody in the wrestling business call the gorilla position the gorilla position?
No, in TNA, they called it the go position. You can get Cock-a-Doodle-Doo on your other show that you do, and you can ask him all these questions.
He named it the go position?
I guess.
Okay.
I think it was a holdover from
So you're all
WCW.
over here in 2011 for Victory Road. Bischoff's a part of the show.
Correct.
Vince Russo is here for the show.
Correct.
The main event is Sting. He's going to be challenging for the world title with Jeff Hardy in the main event. And you see him 2.5 hours prior to, and he's fine. Matt Hardy's on this show. He works a couple matches before Jeff. When do you first realize, Houston, we have a problem?
When Jeff's music started and they're yelling for Jeff, and Jeff wasn't there. And I left the area of the gorilla position there where I'd been standing to go try and find Jeff. And when I went outside...
Nobody had smartened you up at that point?
Smartened me up to what?
That Jeff's fucked up.
Nobody knew Jeff was fucked up at that point.
Okay.
So I go outside and I see two guys carrying Jeff. His feet are literally dragging the ground.
Who are the guys?
Bruno and Tilly, two guys that work there.
Okay.
And
so they're just trying
Bruno and Tilly, underrated. Great guys, busted their ass. I got to give them a shout out because they're two good guys. And Jeff was out of it. Jeff was under the influence of something.
Yeah.
And he was out of it. And they got Jeff to the gorilla position, and while we're sitting there talking about he's in no shape to go out there, he just walked out.
He just walks right past you?
Well, he didn't walk, not like right in front of us, but we were standing there, and next thing you know, I'm looking on the monitor and go, oh my God, he's out.
How does that happen?
Okay, you and I are talking.
Yeah.
Okay, he walks right by and just goes. You don't think he's going to go out, but he did.
So nobody thought it was necessary to take him by the hand and sit him down. They just thought, hey, he knows
we didn't think he was capable of getting up the stairs.
He's Weekend at Bernie's almost.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now he's meandering down the ramp.
Yeah.
You have to be shitting bricks.
Yeah.
So you're seeing the monitor. You're standing
And-
with Bischoff and who else?
Eric was there. Sting was there. We got Dixie there, just saying, hey, you know, she's.
Where's she normally watch the show?
I don't know. She likes to watch out in the crowd.
But she's back for this.
Well, yeah, we got her back there for that. I said, hey, he can't. Well, you know, he'll be all right.
What's Russo saying?
Well, Russo was in the truck. So I ran out to the truck to tell Russo what was going on because I didn't want to talk about it over the headsets. So I went out and I said, man,
even though it was apparent, but you still wanted to respect a little bit of privacy. Or just not just hear the dirty laundry.
Right, not, you know, go get on a podcast and talk about all this shit. So we came back and Eric and I discussed. We said, well, he can't work a match, and it was unprofessional, it was uncalled for, and we talked to Sting and said, need you to go out there and just beat him. Just go out.
Scale of 1 to 10, how pissed off is Sting?
Sting was pissed. Sting was about a 108 on a scale of 1 to 10 at that point. And
is he screaming and cussing mad?
No, he doesn't scream and cuss. He was seething. He was mad inside where it counts.
It was apparent.
Yeah. And I said, you know, you just need to go out there and get him down, pin him, tell the ref count 3. We had Eric go out and actually try to tell Jeff, hey, we're going to beat you. Just lay down and let's get out of this.
Bischoff goes out.
Yeah, Bischoff went out.
And says, hey,
he cut a promo, and then he put the microphone down and went over and told Jeff, told Sting, and that's what we're going to do.
And it was like a minute, and he pins him.
And he pinned him. And
was there any
Jeff
thought
was
to, hey, we really screwed the fans here on the main event. We need to send somebody else out there and have another match after. I realized you still had to deliver that, but it was horseshit. So was there any thought like, man, let's send Matt Hardy out, or let's send Van Dam out, or something?
At that point, it was more of a shock and let's get the fuck out of it. Cut our losses. There wasn't anybody right there to send out.
Yeah.
And
a lot of guys may not realize this, but it's not like people imagine. When your match is over, you go get your shit and you leave the building.
Yeah. And, you know, it was unfortunate, and Jeff left right after that. And
wait, hang on. What did you say to him after the match?
I didn't say anything to him.
What did Bischoff say?
Bischoff did. He left. Jeff kind of like just disappeared. I don't know if he went off the side or whatever, but no one saw him when he came back, and he disappeared. But Terry Taylor was in charge of talent relations at that time. And then...
Well, that's not his fault.
Hang on.
Okay.
Can I finish my story?
Yeah.
So when I came in and took over talent relations and Terry unceremonially had left, they asked me, so what are you going to do about Jeff Hardy? I said, well, first of all, tell me what was done about Jeff Hardy.
Yeah, that's a fair question.
They said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, is he suspended? Is he, you know, what was the fine? When's he coming back? What are we doing here? I said, well, I don't know.
They did nothing?
No one ever talked to him. He left that night, and allegedly no one ever talked to him.
How long ago? I mean, how much time passes?
At this point, probably about 4 weeks.
So they've been sending him checks every week for a month.
Oh, I'm sure they didn't miss his.
But nobody talked to him.
Nobody talked to him.
This is the ostrich analogy you started talking about at the beginning of the show.
Yeah.
So
I had to be the shit heel and call him and say, hey, man, you know, it's unprofessional and put us in a shitty position, put you in a shitty position, and we're going to have to suspend you until you can get some help. So the idea was for him to get some counseling, get some help, and when he was right, bring him back. And he did that. You know, he was going through some tough shit at the time. He did that. He got it cleaned up, and I never saw him even remotely to where you could think, well, I wonder if he's had a drink or something like that. Not once. And got his shit straight. Came back, apologized to the locker room. Everybody accepted it. And was a model citizen. And now has reinvented himself, and he and his brother both are reinvented and relevant again.
Yeah, and it's important to say here, we're not burying Jeff Hardy. It's really a positive story. He had a lot of challenges.
It's a success story.
Absolutely. He had a lot of challenges in his life in 2011. He has an arrest, and he, worked through that, worked through this, and now seemingly on the other side and doing real well.
Yep.
So it's a success story. And he got he's still very beloved by all the guys. I don't know anybody who dislikes Jeff Hardy.
Nope.
He is here in TNA.
Jeff Hardy's here?
Well, we're not in TNA.
Oh. Yeah, thank God.
We don't have a tax lane either. He's here in TNA.
And I've got insurance. So.
Roll Tide. Let's just call it like it is. He was one of the most over talents in WWE, and he winds up in TNA for a reason similar to the one that Kurt Angle's here for. You're head of talent relations. Y'all just don't drug test shit down there. Am I right?
They drug test people. No, they did drug test people.
Well, how does that work? How do these guys who are super over and stars and needle movers in both places, and specifically we're saying Kurt Angle and Jeff Hardy, can't make it work in WWE, no problem in TNA?
Well, the drug tests were for the athletic commissions in the different states, like I want to say Washington State or Oregon, and the states that had them, so they had to do a drug test. And at the first of the year, they would come in, do physicals, do drug tests, and send them out.
But that's it.
That's it.
How'd you feel?
If there was reason to suspect someone was on drugs, and we'd do a drug test.
How many times do you remember doing that? Freestyle that in TNA?
I know I did it at least 3 times.
Same guy?
No.
3 different guys?
2 different guys.
Okay. And the idea was you didn't feel like they were safe. You felt like they were a hazard to other people. What was the motivation? What gets you to say, oh, we got to drug test that guy? Just to catch him?
Oh, God, no. Well, no. I mean, that's a horrible reason to
No,
do
I agree.
If someone is impaired, you don't want them out there potentially to hurt someone else and hurt themselves.
So rather than just look at them and do the eye test and say, hey, you're fucked up, you can't go. Instead, you just say, hey, I need you to do me a favor.
I did both.
Okay.
I gave them an opportunity to tell me.
And if they said no, then you followed up with, here it is.
Great. Cool, man.
Then you got no problem doing this.
Because there's a feeling here, and I'm one of them that feel that you're not right. So I'm going to need you to put this in here so that I can then take it away from everybody that thinks you might be a little fucked up right now.
Wow. That's a real way to pitch it.
But then if they balk at having a piss in the bottle, then you have your doubts. Or they take it right then and go do their business and hand it back to you, and it's clean. And you go, okay, man, something's not right. We got to fix it. But if they, come back and they're dirty, so you had your chance. You could have told me.
So this is like one of those GNC tests that you just do right then?
No, it was with the facility. I believe it was Aegis or something like that.
How'd you turn it so fast?
In Orlando? You didn't. You had to give it to them. You didn't get the result back for like a day or 2.
Okay.
But I wouldn't let them work if there was suspicion.
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay. But you still paid them. I mean, they're innocent until proven guilty.
They
right?
are.
Just
for the record, they were all guilty. But
sure, I have no doubt. Undertaker and Kane. This goes about 6.5 minutes, and Kane's wearing a new outfit here. He doesn't cover his shoulders, and you get to see more of his physique. Kane is as big as a house here. He's probably at his most jacked. And Taker here is kind of in transition. He's doing the American Badass character, and they meet in the aisle. And Taker starts going for Kane's mask early. And Ross makes mention that he doesn't remember anyone ever going for it before. So it's clear that's going to be the story that they tell. And he manages to rip the mask about 2.5 minutes in. And then Taker nails Kane with stairs at ringside. And now we've got some blood. And then all of a sudden, before you realize it, Taker has Kane's mask off completely. And Kane manages to cover his face with his hair and his hand. And then threatens to retreat, and he does. He heads straight towards the back. So Taker's music starts for no apparent reason, because technically the match never officially began with no opening bell. So I guess there wasn't really a match here, but the whole segment was about 6.5 minutes. The finish, or I guess lack of one, is one that Wade was critical of, but he still gave it 2 stars. This seems kind of out of place here, Bruce. What do you think of unmasking Kane like this without more pomp and circumstance, so to speak?
It was out of place, and it was a Band-Aid to get through the Big Show debacle. You know, there was a plan to do Big Show and Undertaker here. Big Show not being in shape made him change plans midstream. So Kane got turned heel and got thrown in to basically an old program with his brother, The Undertaker. So let's have a fight and not really have a match. But it went nowhere. It didn't do a lot for either guy. It was a decent fight, I guess, for the time being. It was unique. But yes, it was a wasted opportunity, and Undertaker taking a mask off without any real build up to it. Especially like, we did it later on with Kane unmasking himself with RVD in the Garden, but this was just anticlimactic. And I don't think it did a lot for either guy.
No, I would agree. And it's kind of, I don't know, it feels like a throwaway match. Both of these guys are bona fide main eventers. Undertaker, obviously, a legend even by this point. And it doesn't feel like a very memorable SummerSlam moment. Next up, we go to Kurt Angle's locker room. He dials a cell phone, and in Triple H and Stephanie's office, their cell phone rings. Stephanie picks it up and looks nervous and says, "Hello, Mom." And Triple H said he wants to talk to her. When he says hello, there's no answer on the other end. So Triple H tells Stephanie that his mom, or her mom, just hung up on him. So they're really playing this whole Kurt Angle, Stephanie angle pretty hard here. Angle's out first, and he takes the house mic and acknowledges that there are a lot of people expecting an apology for him kissing Stephanie. And his apology is that he's sorry he didn't do it a heck of a lot sooner. He's an Olympic gold medalist. He didn't win those medals from backing down or second-guessing himself, and that he can give Stephanie the type of passion that Triple H could never give his wife. So, of course, Triple H is out. They start brawling. The match doesn't officially start until The Rock's entrance, and that's when now we see that Triple H has told Stephanie to stay in the locker room. Triple H goes out to the Spanish announce table and tosses the monitors to the side, goes for the pedigree, and the table collapses. Kurt Angle lands awkwardly on his face, and the timing of the miscue couldn't have been better, since at that point in the match, Angle was supposed to be knocked out anyway. So The Rock comes down when his music's out. The story that we hear in the newsletters right after is that when Triple H asked Angle if he was okay, all he hears is snoring. When Angle does come back later in the match and finish his role, everyone is super impressed. Specifically, Kurt Angle recently told this story to our good buddy Justin over at Sports Illustrated. If you haven't already, check out Extra Mustard. They're really putting us over hard on Sports Illustrated. We appreciate their support. They've been with us almost from the beginning, and Justin really takes care of us. Angle said, "Triple H led me through the match. As far as being a wrestler, he's up there in the top 10. His working capability is phenomenal, and he has the ability, and very few can do this, to adapt to any situation. And the only ones I've known that could do that are Austin, Undertaker, and Triple H. If something tragic happens, they adapt so fast. When I got my concussion at SummerSlam 2000, Triple H did so much for me in that match. When I went through that table, I was out. Stephanie brought me back out, and when we got back to the ring, I asked her, 'What do I do?' And she said, 'When Rock's foot hits the ropes, pull him out.' So I grabbed him by the foot and pulled him out of the ring, and then looked at Stephanie. She said, 'Throw him into the steps.' So I throw him into the steps, and then she said, 'Get the hell in the ring.' There was a spot where he was going to hit me with a sledgehammer, but I had a concussion, and at that point, I don't even know what I was doing out there. My mind was blank. I came to 2 hours after the pay-per-view. There was a spot where Triple H was going to hit me with a sledgehammer, and he put his hand on my head to make sure I ducked so he could hit The Rock with the sledgehammer. If you watch it over, you'll see that I was really clueless. He was looking out for me the entire match. They literally had to walk me through every step of the match to make sure I was safe. I don't remember any of it, but for them, it must have been a nightmare. Triple H is one of the best I've ever seen." So I'm sure we'll talk about the match in a minute, but let's talk about this concussion situation. obviously reading that in 2017 is like, wow, what the fuck is going on? This is so dangerous, knowing what we know about concussions and head injuries now, but we didn't know that back then. Back then it was, oh, he got his bell rung, rub some dirt on it, get back out there. And there was great pride in doing that. That would never happen today. You were there. Do you know as soon as he rolls over after that table collapses, oh, he's fucked?
We knew once I saw Triple H talking to him.
Yeah.
And I've got the gorilla position. I had several different shots of the
action,
of the area. So I had other camera shots where I could see, and you can actually see it on the cut that's on the network right now. But you see Triple H talking to him, and you can actually see Hunter. Kurt tries to get up, and you see Hunter pull Kurt down and tell him to stay down. And then Kurt lets the referee know, and the referee went to Kurt. But there was a spot there, and it was just a spot to get the match started, and for Rock and Hunter to go one-on-one for a while and get Kurt out of the match, and then Kurt would get involved later, but never to come back. So when Kurt was out, and the trainer and the paramedics went down to talk to Kurt, he had been knocked silly, and he was out of it. So the decision was made, bring him back and get him checked out. And if he can't go, then we'll just have a single match with Triple H and The Rock. So when Kurt came back, they made the decision that, okay, we'll see how he is, go get him checked out. And it was Kurt's decision. And I personally talked to Kurt that night backstage and asked him, I said, you okay to go? He says, yeah. No, I just got my bell rung. I'm fine. I've got it. Like you said, same situation today, never would have happened. He never would have gone back out there. But, kudos to Kurt, kudos to Rock and Hunter for having the match that they had without him, and then being able to adapt when Kurt came back out for the finish. But Kurt, definitely told us, no, I'm good to go. And the doctor, the trainer, everybody felt, you know what, I think he's all right. He just got knocked silly. And again, we had no idea. We didn't know the shit that they know now about concussions and head injuries and all that other shit then.
No shit, because he was cleared to perform the very next night. They go 20 minutes total. Technically, this is a three-way. The crowd pops hard for The Rock. They're all over The Rock and love him. The People's Elbow gets a phenomenal pop when it goes down. We haven't talked about the People's Elbow a lot. Do you remember anybody in particular saying, I ain't fucking selling that. That's shit. I'm not doing that.
It's one of the most over moves in the business.
I'm not arguing that, but it feels like this is the time when guys have really strong opinions about stuff and finishes. Did anybody balk at a People's Elbow? Did Stone Cold ever say, oh yeah, man, just fucking hook me in the middle after the People's Elbow. I want to get pinned with that.
If you want to get beat, you want to get beat with their finish, and he did. So, no, it was over, and he was when the most over guy in the territory, that's his finish. You're going to take his finish and sell it. It was hokey as shit, but you know what? It worked. The claw was hokey as shit.
Here's what I love.
As shit.
You know it's a shit finish, and I'm wanting you to tell me if anybody else thought it was a shit finish, and you just feel the need to defend the shit finish rather than telling me.
I am going to defend the shit finish because it worked.
I'm not asking you to defend it. I'm asking if anyone else didn't like it.
I'm sure a lot of people didn't like it, but you asked me if people had a problem taking it and balked at taking it and refused to take it. No.
Okay, cool. Glad we had this talk.
If you're working with The Rock and you're on top, you're happy to be working on top, and if he's going over and that's what he's going over with, that's how he's taking it.
So help me understand. For the 19th time here on the show, we have a man hit a woman. Triple H nails Stephanie in the face. She takes a bump. She's knocked out. This feels like you guys are doing this almost in every match. why, when you're so quote unquote sensitive about PTC, is there so much violence against women on the show?
I can't answer that one. I don't know what the hell their rationale was.
You mean our?
Yeah. Our.
Well, here you go. Let's talk about the finish here. Rock gives Triple H the people's elbow for the pin. Rock is celebrating his win in the ring. And Ross and Lawler wonder if Triple H hit Steph intentionally. Dave, forced to have it, Wade would say, a good main event, especially the pre-match Triple H versus Angle action and the dramatic finishing minutes. Rock Triple H action had a rerun feel to it, and it seemed to be filler until Steph and Angle returned to the match. Angle picked Steph and shot Triple H a stare before returning to the back. Angle fit in just fine with the two top dogs in this high-pressure spot on the pay-per-view. He gave it 4 stars. So I do feel like the world title here is still a little bit of an afterthought, because the big story is Angle going down, Angle making the heroic comeback because Steph is saying, do it for me, do it for me. She goes down, and then he carries her to the back, and this feels like it's the primary source of the pay-per-view. Let's talk about the creative here. There's been lots of rumor and innuendo out there that this all happens at a time when Chris Kresge is the head writer, and many wrestling fans have heard for years and years that this guy is the fucking real genius behind WWF Creative. Can you speak about Chris Kresge and his involvement? He's somebody who's kind of a mythical figure to wrestling fans who've been paying attention.
Chris Kresge was the gentleman that was brought on to be the head writer after Vince Russo had left. There was a little gap there. Tommy Blancha and Brian Gewirtz had been hired on to help Russo and Ed Ferrara right before they left. So Brian was on, Tommy Blancha was on, and then Vince had made a decision to bring on a head writer to oversee both shows, and brought on Chris Kresge. Now, no one really knows where the hell Chris came from. Chris had done a showrunner on some talk shows. He had written a book on the Brady Bunch and had written a book on William Shatner. Kresge's a super nice guy. As I was going back and I was reading things about SummerSlam 2000, and I started getting into reading some comments from people talking about how Chris Kresge was the genius that held the WWF together after the Attitude Era and was able to cohesively keep all the storylines together and had these storyboards for all the top talent, and was this genius at putting together television. I reiterate, Chris is no longer with us. Chris passed of cancer in 2005. Unfortunately, no, Kresge was not. In my opinion, and I would dare say that anybody that worked with him at the WWE would share this opinion. I never saw Chris do anything. Chris never produced one pre-tape. Chris never ran one production meeting. At that time, the few writers' meetings and creative meetings that I was in for television with Chris, Vince would start the meeting off with, all right, Brian, what do you got? And turn to Brian Gewirtz, who would basically have a list of his ideas in a format for the show. Kresge would end up typing it all up and turning it into Vince. But I would have to give the credit as far as the creative and the cohesiveness to hold everything together for the years that Kresge was, quote, head writer, has got to go to Brian and Brian, and to a lesser extent, Tommy Blancha, who did do all that. I'll never forget the very first meeting that Kresge came into, and Vince got up in front of us and told us about that Chris is going to be the new head writer, and he's got this board in his office, and he's got everybody's name on it. and he's going to have stories for everybody, and he's going to have this big board. And the running joke in the agent meeting for the next 6 months was, has anybody seen that big board? You know, he's got a board in his office with everybody's name on it, so he's got to be a genius. Got to shatter the myth. Kresge, nice guy, but I don't know of one idea that he ever came up with. I don't know. Like I said, he never did a production meeting. He never produced a pre-tape. He would sit and watch baseball during the shows. Big baseball fan, big Mets fan. But just not the case. For that time, it was all Brian and Tommy Blanchard and Vince McMahon for the most part.
You told me to ask you about Vinny's Steakhouse. Do you want to hit us with that one?
Well, Vinny's Steakhouse, there was an advertisement in the middle of the pay-per-view for Vinny's Steakhouse. And Vinny's Steakhouse was run by a gentleman by the name of Dusty, who was Vince McMahon's best friend growing up. And I always get asked about, there was an episode of Raw around this time where it was dedicated to Rose. And Rose was Dusty's mom who ran Vinny's Steakhouse, and I just figured people would ask about what the hell Vinny's Steakhouse was. Vinny's Steakhouse was Vince's best friend's steakhouse, who named the steakhouse Vinny's, and that's where we all partied in Raleigh, North Carolina all the time. And it was a great steakhouse, unfortunately out of business now, but it was a good time. It was in the middle of the pay-per-view.